Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Jack for everybody I have not met. I currently work with Tara, Alec, Sean, Keisha, and others at GSV Labs. My previous role was in freight forwarding at Flexport. I gave a little spiel on that a second ago, but they're super fast growing, tech first freight forwarder. I'm super scatterbrained in my memory of all the freight things that went on there, so I'm gonna just like go off in tangents and random directions, but I'll try to reel it back in as best as possible, and really excited to be here with y'all.
Can you hear me? Yeah, Seth Page. This is my 8th startup, fourth one on the industrial side. All of them have been B2B enterprise. Probably funded about 40 or 50 companies and acquired them. Started off in logistics and supply chain in a warehouse at the world's biggest seaweed manufacturer out of Santa Cruz in the 80s. So for this gray beard, you can all guess that. 90s, I was doing startups in logistics and supply chain, including QuoteShip.com, which we sold to Logistics.com, which then got bought by Manhattan Associates, and a lot of them since then. And again, as I said, since then it's been primarily on the industrial side, industrial IoT, anything to do with operations where supply chain, logistics, transportation, manufacturing all fall within kind of the end-to-end supply chain.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Matt McGraw, and I have more of a consulting background. I have been in Silicon Valley for 25 years, grown and sold in a couple different businesses, but the biggest kind of far-reaching business was a company called Rocket Science Consulting, and we had one arm that was corporate innovation and one arm that helped quickly scaling startups scale. And it was not any particular vertical. So logistics and AI were part of the story, but really kind of technology adoption is really the larger overarching story there. I sold my last company in 2015 and retired, and it's good, it's fun, try to get there. But then I was so dumb, I started another company. Actually, I started 2 more companies. But the one that I'm here for today is called Dispatch Labs, and we have a big data analytics platform that uses some fancy tech and fancy mathematics to allow untrusted parties to share data in a trusted way. Obvious use cases in logistics and supply chain. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm going to jump right into the questions after I say I apologize that my chair is higher than theirs. I could not find the red chair, so I am on a blue chair. And I'm very tall already. So my first question is kind of, when we think about supply chain, one of the biggest frustrations is that information is disparate. It exists in silos, owned by various stakeholders. Even when it is made available, it's largely unindexed, typically done through emails, phone calls, spreadsheets. I want to direct this first question to Seth. Your company helps other companies, leverage big data. Where would you advise someone to look if they wanted to start utilizing data that they hadn't been utilizing?
Yeah, the factory floor, the warehouse, the DC. The reality is 90% of businesses run on small data. So, our whole business it's called throughput.ai, and we use existing data sets that are there to enable existing teams to solve existing problems. And the reality is 87% of all supply chain and logistics companies don't even use BI. Mm-hmm. So if you don't use BI, it means you don't have your data in order. If your data is not in order, you're basically on an Excel spreadsheet. You're uploading CSV files with 44,000 rows at a time. Mm-hmm. You're uploading POs, right? You're doing there's still a lot of manual paperwork out there. EDI didn't sweep the whole world, just the bigger companies. So, EDI is great at a certain level, or was great, but it never made it down to the root. So the very first thing we do when we walk in is we say, we just want to walk the floor. Whatever your business is, whether it's retail, whether it's logistics, whether you're in a DC, whether it's a factory, walk the floor and point out data sets that they're not even aware of. Because the operations team is keeping the business up every 20, 60, 90 minutes at a time. They're thinking of the next shift in the next day and keeping, they're thinking of, OEE, MTTR, MTTA, and I only get paid if this thing's up and running. And if things go down, it's costing $60,000 a minute at Toyota or $22,000 a minute at Jaguar Land Rover as examples for automotive. They aren't thinking ivory towers, let's spend 4 months manually crunching and cleansing data and play with something to show you results that happened 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. They don't have that luxury. They're focused on now. So we say start small, start with the data you have, show the quick wins, free up cash flow from that, and now that you have an ROI or an IRR, depending on how you look at it, an ROA, you could now then go and free up additional budget to pull in more data sets, and the next thing you know, you've got the makings of a data lake or a private cloud that you can do a lot more with. And as you pull more data in, you also get that metadata effect that's exponential. You actually turn the whole thing sideways. You've got a convoluted neural network technically, but really what happens is you can pull out, when you have thousands of KPIs now coming in from multiple data sets, you can create sub KPIs and meta KPIs, and you could do a lot more with that. But again, you've got to have AI and technology to do that, but you can't do that until you have data.
Okay, so now we have the data. Matt, how should executives be thinking about their data as it relates to others? So, like, what variable of that data should they protect? Where should they share? One example I'm thinking of is ocean carriers and ports. They're not competitive, but they work together every day. Should they share data?
They should, but they're not going to. So I want to go back to something you said. You said walk the floor first. There's another component that you're doing, which is you're attacking the cultural problem first. Technology, light switch is a technology. 150 years ago it was magic to most people. So the technology to me has never been interesting. It's about its adoption and what it can do for real people, solving real problems that real humans have. And you don't get that luxury until you get people who trust you, who think you have their best interest in mind. And so you do that first. You walk the floor, talk to real people with small problems, help them solve those small problems, and build up that trust. And so trust is what's lacking between companies. And I think that distributed ledger is a tech that attacks that, but I don't think that I don't think you can start there. I don't think you can start with these two big conglomerates. Hey, you should share your data. Here's a technology that's going to do that. You're not going to get the people to agree. And frankly, usually the margins are made where there's information asymmetry, where people don't share information and somebody has knowledge that the other people don't have. And why would they start to share that? That's where they're making the money. It might be better for us as consumers. It might be better for the people on the floor, but it's definitely not better for the bottom line.
So that's kind of a dark, scary perspective. But then, so where does innovation come in?
So I think innovation happens over time, a lot longer time period than most people think. And I think it's doesn't have to be inevitable, but I think it's almost inevitable. And I think the people that come to the conclusion that sharing data in a way that feels safe to them first, I think they're going to win because they're going to disrupt themselves first, and then the proof's in the pudding 20 years from now.
My next question is for all three of you guys. So if we think about building this data lake and how the world is tracking towards automation, we know that automation fails if it's fed incomplete data, irrelevant data, or just blatantly incorrect data. So if you already have that data lake, how can you utilize that to make sure you're not feeding it garbage data?
Yeah, so something that comes to mind here is this kind of notion that within a startup, there's a huge amount of value put on contribution. It's like innovation, people that come to the table and do something new or push the bar and execute well. But my perspective, slightly naive, but my perspective is that when I look at these larger enterprises, what they more so propagate is the ability to follow process. So when I reflect back on my time at Flexport, I think about something that was crucial to the operations, and that was like just standard operating procedures. The way that they operated was in what they called units or clusters or whichever, which had several different people that had the skill sets to represent a full team. And as people transitioned to different teams or different roles, whatever it may be, left the company, what was still in place were these things called standard operating procedures, things to standardize the process. Everybody who works at Flexport is the data collecting mechanism. So by doing your job, you are collecting data. That kind of has two components. One is the process that propagates the ability to capture the data. Creating strong processes is related to standard operating procedures. So as soon as you lock down how something should be done and record it so that that history and that mindset can be captured for the next set of people doing those tasks, then data will be collected in a synchronized way. And when data is captured in a synchronized way that's based off of a strong process, then you shouldn't run into an issue of garbage data, quote unquote. Because if you're reflecting back on the data that you're capturing as it relates to a strong process, then it should be correct and, in that case, usable in any kind of automation that you want to move forward with.
I'd say this. I mean, we talk about garbage in, garbage out. It's also true that one person's garbage is another person's treasure. And I mean it this way: is you can take any amount of data. If you haven't analyzed it yet, you have absolutely no value, no idea what its value is. Right? You don't know if it's good or bad. And you can throw it to the data scientists, but data science wasn't a domain 6-7 years ago. It wasn't a field you could be, right? You were a data researcher or a statistician or something like that. So you get people coming out of college now who think they're data scientists, but they have zero idea about automotive, oil and gas, energy. They've done a couple use cases maybe when they were doing their masters, but that's it. So the problem is the people who actually have the knowledge. It's the operations tech people, OT. That's where the knowledge is, right? These are people who have been on the factory floor in the warehouse for 10, 15, 20 years, and a lot of them are getting very gray and moving on. And a lot of it's stuck in their head, right? You haven't done a Kaizen or a Yoko 10 type of sharing arrangement in the US yet. And so part of it is, if you take an OT person and say, take a look at this data, they intrinsically, by knowing the data, can say, 3/4 of those columns are completely worthless. All I care about for my piece of the job, for my cell, my pod, is these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 KPIs. That's it. That's all I care about, right? Further down the line, there's another guy or gal, and they have another 6 or 7 KPIs that they're responsible because their butt's on the line for uptime there, or for quality, or for defect parts. And you can go up and down the line, and everyone's got their KPIs. So there's thousands of KPIs that are important, but there's only certain ones that are important for people. You put the wall in there, you go over to IT. IT's got a bunch of budget, 30% of the toll-ride budget. They're building a data lake. They've got a bunch of analytics software, some static BI tools they've been playing with. And they build beautiful graphs and margins, but what does it show? It shows nothing but graphs and margins. The OT people look at it and go, well, that doesn't mean anything because, again, you're looking at data that's bad. And if it comes back to your cultural point is, most people don't even know what OT is, right? People in the Valley, we grew up on IT, right? Information technology. 99% of people in Silicon Valley are IT. Most of the OT folks are sitting in Middle America, in the South, in Japan, in Korea, in China, in manufacturing places all over the world. In Colombia, building car parts for Nissan that end up going to an assembler in Mexico that end up going over the border to Indiana and end up in a Nissan or a Subaru or a Toyota there, whatever. But IT and OT don't talk. OT doesn't have time for IT, and IT only controls 30% of their budget. 70% of the budget is controlled by OT, who is just keeping the plant and the operations up and running. So long term, you've got to get these two sides to work. And IT has to figure out, how do I get OTs to work with me, because they don't have time. So until OT can help you, you have to look at the data and say, okay, how do I use heuristics? How do I use algos? How do I leverage OT operations people knowledge through like a Kaizen AI or a Yoko 10 AI type of framework to capture and institutionalize some of this knowledge that is walking out the door, as you mentioned, out of a cell. That person walks out and they retires. New person comes in. Well, who's going to train them on standard operation procedures besides throwing them a big piece of paper and saying, read this, right? 99% of it was in that guy's head. So that's part of it is cultural, and I agree with you too. It's not revolutionary. Like these companies, you get into some of these businesses, like you think of like consumer goods. We're talking 1.5–2% net margins, right? There's not a lot of money to go around. So if you don't free up working capital by smoothing out your operations and getting rid of excess inventory and doing more just in time and kind of Toyota production system, you're not going to have the working capital to invest on the IT side of the house and the R&D side of the house to even put this cool technology in place, because you're just busy trying to keep your investors happy.
What you just said.
Could I ask you a quick question? Actually, we were talking about the distrust aspect of data between a port operator and a carrier. I don't know. You could put it in various different situations. Something that I wanted to point out, though, was it's rare for, especially in the supply chain and logistics industry, it's rare for a customer to be using one of anything. So for instance, I must have worked with 5-6 different clients while I was at Flexport that used other freight forwarders, and they may have used 3 different ones on top of Flexport. And that's very common, I think, for 3PLs. That's absolutely common for carriers. Port terminals you rarely even have control over. So if there's no way to trust multiple parties and their data sets and have collaboration, I don't personally see a way for these companies to continue to move forward. I think they're going to hit a point where they're going to need to collaborate. And when that comes into play, a question I wanted to open up to you is like, how do we create an environment where there is trust? And even if there is trust, how do you create an environment where two probably different data sets can talk with one another?
So that's where distributed ledger can come in, and artificial intelligence to a certain sense. Distributed ledger is just a distributed database. Everyone makes it something that it's not. It just is a distributed database, and a public one is owned by no one. So if you have systems that talk to that public blockchain, then you can have all of that data reside in that public blockchain. Not necessarily to see the data directly. You can use zero knowledge proof technology so that you can analyze that gigantic data ocean, let's call it, and get back verifiably true answers that to common questions, so that you can verify whatever you need to, in a way that's not scary. That you're not giving up your secret sauce necessarily. And I do think that that's feasible within the next 2 or 3 years, technologically.
So my next question is again for all of you. We talk about organizing our data lake. We're talking about distributed ledgers. Seth, you mentioned, how do you know it's garbage data until you run it past a data scientist? So when is the best time to bring
operations. Data scientist doesn't know.
But when is the right time to bring on a data science team? Is it before you collect the data? Is it while you're collecting data? If folks haven't onboarded a data science team, is it too late for them?
So this is my 4th company dealing with data scientists, and some of my best friends are data scientists.
I like how you're prefacing whatever you're about to say.
So the data scientists are great to use in-house to build tools. If you are an end consumer, a large corporation, the minute I find out that someone's hiring a data scientist to solve a problem, I know that they're going to get nothing done for the next 1 or 2 years. Because you're bringing someone in who has no domain knowledge, who has no relationship with OT, right? They're in an ivory tower. They have no access to real data sets that matter. They might get dumped a data set that they can play with, but it's a static old data set that has nothing to do with ongoing real-time data. It's just the typical excuse of, well, Ford's got a bunch of data scientists, so we have to have a bunch of data scientists at GM and Toyota and everyone else. It's a me too. It's just like VCs, right? Most of them are lemmings. 90% of VCs, basically follow the 10% of VCs that actually make money. Data scientists, the same thing. If you're hiring a bunch of young data scientists to look at your data, you haven't thought about the problems yet. Like, you need to understand, what problems am I trying to solve? If I'm consistently not hitting my EPS, something's wrong with my business. So how do I use my data to solve that problem? Let's start with small problems that I can solve, and let's try to free up working capital. And to do that, you start with small data sets. You don't need a data scientist to look at small data sets, right? Small data sets can be looked at technically with Excel, but more to the point, you want to start using platforms from trusted vendors. We'd like to be known as one, but there's a lot of them out there to start saying, hey, how do I start looking at multiple small data sets to extract value from that, prove out an ROI, and then go to larger and larger. If you're just throwing data scientists and data in a room, you really get that ivory tower effect. And that's, and OT knows that. People in OT will not let IT on the factory floor. They do not want to deal with people. I've been involved in projects that were delayed 6 months to a year because operations would not take a phone call from IT. Yeah. And IT couldn't move anything forward till they got data. And why? Because they're setting up 3 new factories out of 150 around the world. They're upgrading multiple MES systems and PLS systems and IMS systems and TMS systems. They got a new QAD Channel Islands version, a new Progress Open Edge version. All this new software they're doing at the same time. They're migrating all their Windows at the back end. They don't have time to give you data. What are you going to do? What have you done for me lately? Right? OT looks at IT and says, these are the guys that fix our laptops when they're broken, and that put our security virus updates on our laptops, and that tell us what websites we can't look at when we have a 10-minute break during an 8 or 10-hour session. That's what IT is for most people. Yeah. Silicon Valley, we're all gods. Outside of Silicon Valley, we fix laptops.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
One thing to add there from my experience is this concept of distributed data science. Within Flexport, what they would do, they would enable all of the people in operations to be a data scientist of a low degree. the primary role of their team within that company was to provide the intelligence tools, the visualization tools that allowed the operations folks to leverage that data. A big piece of where their market was shifting was from transactional work to consultative work. They didn't want people to be on the ground, similar to probably what you see in warehouses, factories, whichever, doing transactional work, administrative work, just clicking buttons in a certain order to get a certain outcome. Instead, what they were trending towards was leveraging information to empower the operator to better consult the client. So that was done through the data science team and business intelligence tools. One of the things that I observed, which was so powerful to me, was that the people that I worked with, the customers that I had, they were not freight forwarders. Just as if you're a 3PL, they're probably not folks with a background in managing your inventory within a warehouse. So seeing from their perspective, there's just a giant gap in knowledge between what you know as somebody with subject matter expertise and the folks that you're working with that have a lack of clarity on how to do something in a certain way related to the supply chain industry. So leveraging those tools not only enable you to be strategic internally and understand how you can use data to better move forward as a company, but also allows you to consult the customers that you have, show them insights into their supply chain that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. So going back to the original question, when's the right time to have a data science team? I think it's two components. I think one, you need to be very flexible with your data. There's tools out there today to remain flexible with your databases. Two, I think a data science team in the very beginning needs to have two objectives. One is creating insights from the data, and two is providing a way to break down the barrier for the regular people without a background with SQL, without a data science background, to be able to read, analyze, and contribute thoughts based off of those data sets. So I think there's a point in time right after you establish a flexible database where a data science team is necessary and very beneficial.
I can probably add to that actually. With our tool, we actually have multiple views. There's folks on the ground looking at like an and-on screen, red, yellow, green, because they're just looking at, next 5, 10, 15 minutes. There's a view for CEOs, so they can play with the financial dials and see how do I make up $15 million in potential loss over the next 3 weeks so I can hit my EPS number. And then there's views for business analysts, business intelligence folks, and data scientists. And they're more of a medium term. They're playing with things. And if you look at all the large cloud providers, all the large tools, everyone's been talking for 4 or 5 years about data democracy and democratizing data science. And really what you want to do is make data proficiency at a lower level easier for more people, because a lot of people are a lot smarter than they are. They just don't have the time to look at the data. So if you give them tools that allow them to look at the data and free them up, they can do a lot with it without needing to be a data scientist. You can keep the really big problems for the folks up on the hill in the ivory towers who are thinking long term. How do we look at really big data sets and think of really big strategic problems, not the next 60, 90, 120 days? I'd say secondly to that is, I won't name a company, but we've done use cases for ports and some of the biggest ports in the world, biggest automotive manufacturers, and one of them in Germany, I'll say, which is pretty broad. They have a team of over 200 people, solution engineers, that sit in a room and take data sets, pull them out of different systems that have been there for decades, and manually massage the data, cleanse the data, play with the data, just to come up with let's call it actionable insights, which I hate the term, to then go out and implement a solution weeks after something's already happened. So the bottleneck's already happened, the problem's already happened, but they're hoping that it pops up enough that they'll catch it the next time. Those are 200 people who are acting like human calculators, right? They do not need to be doing that. That's when machine learning, AI, automation comes in. You could throw all that into a system, could be any system, I'll just call it a black box. It spits out a bunch of KPIs automatically for them, and they could implement solutions in near real time. And that's, if you think about it, I think a great example is, go back 100 years to the old telephone bulbs when it was primarily women back then, but you'd see these pictures of people would make phone calls and they'd pick up and who do you want to talk to, and they had these different coaxial cables, they'd move back and forth. I mean, 100 years later, we don't even have receptionists anymore, we don't even have EAs, everyone just has their own mobile phone. But that was a job that could be automated. But at the time, it fit a hole, it fit a purpose, and those jobs eventually went on. That's right now. We have people who are human calculators that don't need to be human calculators.
I think what you're talking about more broadly is the consumerization of IT, right? Like most people today, almost everyone here can operate a laptop. 20 years ago, when I first started, most people were like, I don't know how to turn this thing on. So those human calculators, absolutely, that can be automated. That's machine learning that could happen today. But more importantly, that problem solving, even that kind of problem ideation could be pushed out to the front line like you've been talking about. Those people can solve the problem probably before those data scientists can even look at a data set.
Correct.
So I'm going to go off course a little bit here. We talk about, training up on the data side. What is an action? How can companies start thinking about this? Is it implementing LMS software? Is it corporate training programs? Is it hiring fresh grads and teaching them new skills? How can we start doing this?
All of those three things? Yeah. It's all his company, right?
I was just going to say something that was effective for me in my experience was having opportunities within a company to enable people to present findings on information that they're constantly using. So something that we did regularly once every 2 weeks was we would download all the data from the past month of shipments, and we would analyze it and come up with insights and present that to our team or teams, dependent on who was related to that specific pieces of information. I found that to be super effective. If data is democratized to the point where people are able to analyze it, it's about building comfortability with analyzing it. I think most people are absolutely capable, but they just don't know where to start. When you look at a lot of numbers, what are you looking for? How do you put it into, this is super basic, but how do you put it into a format that you can analyze information from that data? It's just, you want to take this stigma away from it and make it just accessible to everybody within your company. So, innovation's great, but processes are better. If you can create processes that allow people to feel comfortable and access information that's going on behind the covers of your company, then your employees are going to be your greatest champions.
And it sounds like transparency as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say call me at 415-290. Everything he said, I think one of it is just, as I said before, start small, right? If you try to put a revolution, everyone's going to push back against you in a large corporation, because those are typically your clients or larger corporations. So do it incrementally, step by step. Get the small wins first, start with small data sets, and then pull in more and more and more data to get those big wins. Two is in what you call it, walking the floor. When you sit down or talk to operations people who do, by definition, not have a lot of time, just so you know, if you get the chance to walk for, the first thing I say is, hey, we're in Japan, can we walk your floor for 30, 40, 50 minutes? That usually turns into a 3 or 4 hour, half a day. And we were just up in Seattle area meeting with an aerospace manufacturer, and 30-minute floor walk turned into a 4-hour meeting. Because once they start opening up and you start seeing the bottlenecks, and you start talking to, here's so-and-so, here's Bob, or here's Jeannie, and she deals with quality assurance, and then she starts complaining about this and this, and you just start asking her, so what do you deal with? How does your day look? What are the problems you run into? And you start taking notes. They open up, because no one ever asks them how things actually go. And it all comes down to processes, right? You're actually optimizing processes. When you think about bottlenecks, the processes are the bottlenecks. Any given machine that might fail can be broken down into its subcomponents and its sub-subcomponents and its sub-data sets. And you start analyzing multiple processes, which gets you into multidimensionality of a lot of different KPIs and data sets, which gets you into AI and machine learning. So again, as you add more data and you're looking at more processes to optimize, to try to smooth out your supply chain, optimize your operations, lean out your logistics, you're really optimizing processes over and over and over again. And that's where that technology comes in. But start with small data sets, get the easy wins, and you'll actually find that the money you save, I can't say it's we're actually graphing it right now internally as KPIs, but you're not going to get a linear line. The more data you add, you start to get exponential savings. Again, how much depends on how lean your company is or isn't. Even if you go to Japan, which is, we're talking about the Toyota Honda family, Katura Honda right after World War II, that's the capital of lean, right? You're looking at principles from Deming and from Elias Goldratt, the goal, and Little's law and theory of constraints, all this great stuff. Only 20% of Japanese companies, the big ones like Toyota, are doing really just-in-time and Toyota production systems. 80% of Japanese industry isn't. And if you think of Six Sigma in America, hey, Six Sigma, almost all the companies that embrace Six Sigma are gone, right? Six Sigma was not the end-all be-all. Six Sigma was a subcomponent of Toyota production system. They missed out the other 80%. And so, while it's great to be a black belt, and we usually start with black belts because they understand processes and how to lean things out, they don't get the whole picture, because if they did, GE would still be around.
I liked what you said about destigmatizing this. I think one thing that we tend to do here in the Valley is we come up with a great idea that's sometimes legitimately great, and then we say, this is the end all be all, and it's going to change the world, and your company's going to be fixed in a year. And that's just not how life works. And so rebranding some of these technologies, like big data, sounds scary. It sounds scary to me. I'm like, my brain, I'm getting gray hair. I'm getting slower. I can't analyze data. So machine learning especially is something that's very esoteric to most people. It's just computers automating stuff. And I think rebranding some of this stuff and integrating it into the daily workflow is really important, because the number one champions of change in a company are going to be the frontline people whose lives are going to actually be affected by that change.
Sure. So I want to slightly move away from this concept of leveraging data and move more towards just general innovation in supply chain. And so my first question is, do you all see a future where supply chain is kind of ruled by autonomy, by autonomous vehicles, autonomous robots? How far out is that future, and what steps can we take now to make sure that we're a part of it?
Who's got the magic ball here? Who's got the?
According to Elon, it was yesterday. But even Elon Musk, who was the great proponent of automation, eventually, after a couple nervous breakdowns and late night smoking sections, two things. One is he admitted that, humans are greatly undervalued. We had people who were like hiding things during the walks and hiding things from him because he didn't want to embrace any of the tried and true processes out there that were good. It was like he just wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start anew. And what were his solutions besides just running things so tough that he got rid of a third of his workforce, or a fourth of his workforce? He built a tent. Right. That's how he increased capacity. He built a huge tent next to this multi-billion-dollar factory where people are now sitting outside underneath the blazing Nevada sun, and that large tent allowed him to get enough throughput to actually meet his numbers. So, I mean, from the time of the Jetsons, and even going all the way back to H.C. Wells, we've been talking about robots and automation has had a lot to do with how the middle class has been changed, along with private equity and hedge funds firms. But the reality is, Amazon, which is probably one of the biggest automators out there, they bought Kiva, a number of years ago for hundreds of millions of dollars. It took them years to actually customize the robots and the software to automate everything behind that big glass panel they have. And it's within a very controlled subset, right? Everyone except for Tesla tests their cars in a very controlled way. All the drone stuff, besides hobbyists outside my backyard, but everyone who's testing drones like Amazon, they're doing it on private property, private airports. I mean, people are being pretty cautious. You do not want a 500-pound drone and a package falling on someone's house or head or killing a baby. That happens once, it's done, right? So, again, it comes to your point. It's going to be incremental steps in this thing. I don't think we're going to see flying drones delivering packages in anywhere besides potentially a few small cities that allow it because they want to be on the map for economic development. It's surely not going to happen over in the streets of New York. Anonymous vehicles. I mean, we're like level 2, level 3 right now, right? That's it. We think we're level 5. We're not level 5, right? Anyone's ever tried to watch these vehicles drive in snow or rain, right? I was there the day they had their first crash. I have the PowerPoint of what Tesla sees in rain, in snow. I have PowerPoints of how it differs from LiDAR. And it's pretty amazing what they miss. It's hard enough for humans to figure out how to go through a Tahoe snowstorm. So again, these things are going to be within controlled environments. Why is Phoenix so popular? Straight rows, in a grid, wide, long traffic lights, and 345 days of sun a year. It's a hell of a lot easier to drive. If someone could get a car, an autonomous vehicle, delivery truck for logistics to drive in the cities of Mumbai or Bangalore in rush hour, level 5, you've got it. We're there. When that is the ultimate test. Level 6.
One thing I wanna ask, kind of as a follow on, throughout history, new inventions are scary. When the first automobile was released, people refused to drive it. Horse and buggy, fine with that. Cars look scary. Now we're at this age. You said, one bad accident happens, we're done. But we've seen throughout history with automobiles, airplanes, accidents happen, and we have to pick back up and continue to innovate and tweak where we made mistakes and improve. And we see even today with the accident that happened in Arizona, Uber driving, every other Uber in Pittsburgh right now is autonomous. How can we
with a driver.
go back to stigma? Yeah, going back to stigma, how can we, encourage people that this is a new era and it's a new innovation? Yes, it's scary, but that's the price that we pay.
Yeah, I'll be quick and I'll pass on.
Yeah.
I will give Elon a big shout out here because the press loves sensationalism because it sells ads and good viewership sells more expensive ads. Elon said it very clearly, like, hey, I had, the first bad accident happened, there was a battery fire. Mm-hmm. Guess what? There's over 100 car fires a day in the US. No one ever hears about it except for on their local news maybe because that's all there is to talk about is that and the cat got lost. So statistically, driving a Tesla, on a weighted basis is a heck of a lot safer, right?
Yeah.
It's very unlikely your battery is going to catch on fire. Things like adaptive cruise control and lane maintenance and backup, all the sensors that we don't, a lot fewer children are getting backed up while they're playing in the driveways and run over than they used to because they're all driving big SUVs. So I think getting the statistics out there and pointing out, yes, this is actually a safer technology. Yes, 2 or 3 accidents have happened, and getting in front of them. Yeah. But we're learning from them, and we're still a lot safer than the 22,000 or so car fires that happened last year. So I think part of it's being upfront with the public, because if you try to hide it, sensationalism always wins because people like to turn their necks and watch an accident. And I watched that Palo Alto. I was on the other side when that car burned, that X car burned, with the driver in Palo Alto getting to work that day, and it was amazing to watch that and very sad. But Tesla got out up front of it pretty quick. What a lot of people didn't realize was that the Palo Alto Fire Department had already been briefed on how to put out electrical fires, and that they know they had to send 2 tanker trucks because the bigger battery cars, one won't put it out, right? And it did recatch fire again, right? So we're going to try these things. Accidents are going to happen. It's very unfortunate. You can get into argument about, is Tesla technically using 1 million people as beta testers or not? You've got legal T's and C's you can click off and give that up, and there will be lawsuits. But it's going to get to me incremental. Every other car may be autonomous up there in Pittsburgh or Detroit, but guess what? There's still a driver there, and there's a driver because the one in Phoenix, wasn't paying attention. And as Volvo said, hey, if our systems hadn't been turned off, the car would have stopped, right? It's because you guys turned off our collision aversion that it didn't happen.
Just one other thing to add to that. We'll talk a little bit about this in our roundtable after this panel, but component is consumer education. All of us need to be educated about what the technology is, the risks that are associated, but the upside as well. The other piece, which I just want to briefly touch on and go into deeper detail after the session, is this concept of like regulatory hacking. It's not the best title for what it actually is, but the concept's great, and that is just having collaboration with governments. That is what separates the companies that do it well, aka all of Elon Musk's companies. You think of the Boring Company, you think of Tesla, you think of SpaceX, all highly regulated, but they're able to do it because they collaborate well with government officials. But then you look at an Uber. Uber is like a crazy outlier because they somehow were able to pull it off, so maybe even better in micro-mobility. You look at Lime and Bird, who were kicked out of San Francisco because they thought that throwing money at the problem and having an inventory of equipment was able to kind of steamroll government regulations. I personally, from my standpoint, don't think that's the best way to go about it. I think to destigmatize it, it's customer education and collaboration with the government officials, so they have transparency into what you're building when that terrible situation does arise, because it will arise. Everybody's prepared. You mentioned the preparation that they were able to leverage to put out the fires. That's the kind of collaboration that leads to positive results.
I mean, I live in Los Altos, and they stopped that guy who was one of the city council members who was the drunk driver who fell asleep. And the San Mateo officers, sheriffs, had already decided this is how we're going to stop Teslas when they're in self-driving mode. This is how we corral them. And they did, and it was successful.
There's one more element, which is just time. It's not a sexy answer, but it's true. It's like, first of all, the technical solution's got to be demonstrably better than what came before it. And then people have to be convinced of that truth. And perception lags reality. And my mom doesn't think iPhones are better than the wall phone, right? Because
Yeah.
for her, it's not. It's kind of annoying, and it intrudes in her whatever she does all day. And although the iPad does have solitaire on it, so she's convinced of the iPad's utility at this point. She loves it. But that's just, it's going to take generational change to some degree on a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah.
I'd also let, I'd also let what both of you said was that, you know, and this is a very Silicon Valley issue. When I lived in Palo Alto, everyone around us had a Tesla, right?
Yeah.
They went from Prius to everyone had a Tesla. And then we moved down to Los Altos Mountain View, which is where most of the Googlers live. And I drive home late at night. Every third or fourth car besides being a Tesla is a Waymo, right? Before it was Google cars. And there's also just these random cars that have no markings on them. They're just some random startups. I mean, I see, it is amazing. So it's kind of like that time.
Yeah.
Everyone's experimenting. Everyone's doing things. Uber was the example of a bad player. Like, let's just do it and see what the repercussions is. And we raised so much money that we'll get our way out of it. And Travis paid for that for multiple reasons. And you think of like Waymo as the opposite, which is let's just quietly do this and amass millions of miles safely with pretty benign, boring-looking cars. They had that little egg thing, which is as non-masculine and sexy as you could imagine. I mean, you feel like you can tip that thing over. And then they've got the Pacifica van. It's a minivan, right? So I think Waymo's taken a really good middle ground at, hey, we're doing this, but it's not really in your face, and it's very secure. And, oh, we've been rear-ended 9 times. Like, that's their stat. No one's died from it.
Yeah. So we're running up against time. I'm going to ask one more lightning question. So really quick answers from all three of you. And then I do want to open it up for 1 or 2 questions in case anyone has a burning question inside. And then I promise we'll go to lunch. So my last question is, how can we separate hype from reality with supply chain? We think about robotics. We think about drones. Like, that's cool and all, but what is the reality, and what's next in that journey towards digital transformation?
Proof's in the pudding. You do proof of concepts with real people that have real problems, and they're going to choose the solutions that work. Any top-down solution, kick it to the curb.
I mean, the last company that bought our startup was Progress, and I was on stage there, and they had the drone flying with the replacement part and the AR, VR, and I did all that, and it was a really cool glimpse of the future that goes all the way back to Star Trek, by the way. I mean, they had all this tech in Star Trek. But again, it's the proofs in the pudding. It's small wins, do them early, solve the easy problems, get the low-hanging fruit out of the way, and build up gradually. It'll free up working capital along the way that allows you to do the bigger and the bigger projects and eventually get to that really sexy stuff. But if you don't lean out, when you have 30% of the world is overproduction and waste, right? If you just clean that out, that's $10 trillion that can go to things. You can feed people, you can educate people, you can give money back to investors, you could retrain people, you can put it into R&D. That's what's going to give you the big dollars to do the really big moonshots. But you gotta lean out what you have first. Otherwise, you're just going to be, you're going to be having innovation labs running after solutions that don't solve operational problems.
Thanks.
I think you both hit it on the head there. I suppose lead with vision, and then the reality is incremental steps. Treat every different stakeholder as if they were your customer, and create delightful experiences for all of them, and you'll work towards that grand vision.
Thank you, guys. So we have time for probably 1 or 2 questions if anyone has